Hello, writers and crafters. I'm Valerie Isan.
And I'm Erick Mertz.
And this is episode 78 of the podcast, and it is August 2nd, 2022, as we record this. Today, we're talking about finding the core message of your memoir. So that's going to be super exciting for us. No new patrons this week, but you can go to patreon.com/Valerie Isan, IHSAN. And for as low as $1 a month, you can get some rad benefits. So go check out all of the tiers at patreon.com/Valerie Isan. What are you reading?
Well, I'm doing the Dresden Files. I'm doing it.
Oh, yeah.
So I finished Grave Peril, which was really good. It's just a fantastic series. I don't know why I put it down. I had that question when I finished the book because the first one that I resumed with, Grave Peril. Now I'm reading Summer Night, and I'm only a couple of chapters in, but it's great. There's so much fun.
How many books are in the series? Is it one of those like 80 books or
I
something?
I think it's 13.
Okay. Are you going to read all 13 before you switch to a new book?
No,
Okay.
no.
Like, I don't think I could do that.
Well, it's okay. So just a little like side note, like my mom works at the Friends of the Oregon City Library
Right.
bookstore, and she is always, if I tell her an author name she gives me, she'll bring like a stack of books with that author. And so I'm working on getting kind of a couple of series together because I'd like to start reading more series and from beginning to end. So I gave her like 3. I gave her the Dresden Files. I gave her some Alex Grecian books, and of course she showed up with all of them. Like I have the first 3 books in like 4 series right now, sitting on the floor behind me, and so it's going to be hard to stick to one. So I think I'm going to go. There's a certain arc in the Dresden Files. I'm going to get to the sort of through the first arc, which is like I think 2 more. This one and then another one, and then I'm going to pick up. It's Summer Night, and then there's the one that comes after that. There's like there's like little mini arcs within the series. I learned that from watching a bunch of YouTube videos from fans who are talking about it and how to read it. So I figure I can pause after reading a couple more, and then I'll pick up another and series and I've seen people who do like the 14 books in a row. Their whole like quarter reading is that. I couldn't do that. It's just too much of one thing. Could you?
No. The only long series that I am currently in the middle of is God, I don't even know what the name of the series is, and I didn't read it in order, and now I sort of am. And it's Louise Penny. She's a mystery writer with kind of a literary bent, and Gamache, I think his name is. Anyway, it's one of those long. I think there's probably 9 books in the series or something. But yeah, I can't read. Like, I can read 1. Maybe I could do 2. But then I would have to switch to I would just get too bored. In fact, I'm in the middle of, like, I finished reading the J.D. Barker trilogy. And now I'm kind of like in between. I have a book in my bag that I was going to switch to, because I haven't read literary fiction for a while. And this is an arc. Can't remember the Daughters of something Fong. I don't know. It's a new book, so I can't even remember the title right now. But I haven't started that, and I just remembered that I have a book club book that I need to read, and it is nonfiction again. So it's Newsletter Ninja 2. I haven't read that one yet. The first one by Tammy Labrecque.
Tammy Labrecque.
Yeah, I read Newsletter Ninja years ago, and now there's there's a second book, so I'm going to read that in the book clubs next week. So I'm going to power that one out, and then I'm also like reading little bits of things, kind of like in that in-between stage. I'm picking up stuff that I'd started reading, but they're all like short, like The Dude and the Zen Master. It's not something that I've read straight through, but it's just a conversation between Jeff Bridges and Bernie, I forget his last name, Glassman.
I love the in-between reading. That's one of my favorite. I look forward to getting done with a book. This is how geeky ready I get. Like I try to finish a book early enough in a day so that my bedtime reading is free, and I try to make sure that I can't start a book. I already finished a book a day. I can't start a new book today. So I will find like little things on my tablet and on my Kindle that I
short stories
and because I'm really hooked on that, like how authors are using just the flexibility of Amazon to reach readers. So I have a ton of like my free novella, my free short story
Yeah.
books. So yeah, I love that little reading, the little reading that comes in between
Yeah, I
books.
do
It's
too.
fun.
And I'm dabbling in that a little bit more too. Like I do have a book of short stories, that Magic for Beginners.
Oh, I think I've seen that actually.
Yeah, so I read the first short story and, then started something else. And so yeah, that one's kind of an in-betweeny one also.
Yeah, I read a short story the other night. That's funny. I'm going away for the night, and it's with my wife. And the story is about a husband and a wife that go away at night, and the husband falls asleep, and then it's this like terrifying journey that the wife has.
Ah,
They're on a boat, and she like hears a sound as her husband falls asleep, and then goes off and has this. Yeah, that's why I read it,
don't
and I
fall
thought
asleep on the ride to
I
Portland.
I am not falling asleep first when we go. I'm not. I'm going to make sure she falls asleep, and
Aw,
then that mean it might happen to
that's
me.
love.
I do not
I'll
want you
take
to
it.
fight that
I'll
monster.
take it for you. You go to sleep. I'll fight the dragon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I really want to talk about Memoir since we both write it
Yeah.
and I read it a lot. In fact, I just ordered another one. I can't stop buying memoirs, but I think that it's research, right? Because I'm in the
Yeah.
middle of, revising mine and getting it ready for publication. And so I'm wanting to read other people's memoirs to see if I can get the cadence right. That's the part I'm at in my editing is like what do these words sound like? Is
Right.
are the scenes moving together right? And the transitory, places, the transitions. Anyway, so yeah, I wanted to talk about it.
I love talking about memoirs. I do. So we're different. I mean, I think we should point that out. You're writing your memoir for you.
Hmm.
And although I have talked on this podcast about wanting to do my own memoir, I have, one in me. I think I can say that safely, but I write other people's memoirs. So I sort of do the kind of like the yin to your yang on memoir writing. So I think we're going to talk about like how to get to the core of it, but it's probably very different for each of us in how we do it, right?
That's what I wanted to know because
Right.
I I I have strong feelings about how to
Right.
craft a memoir, and so part of me is like, well, how else could you do it? So I'm really curious to see what your process is too. It's trash day here and the windows are open, so I'm sorry about the trash trucks that are driving by. If it gets really egregious, I'll just mute myself.
One of the podcasts I listen to, there's construction on the building on the other side of the like of the on the sort of the suite on the other side of their where they record, and so it's always funny to like they'll stop and say like jackhammer, so they'll like identify the tools. So if you can identify the vehicle going down Val Street, then there's like put it in the
Bonus.
chat. I put yeah. So the process for memoir for me is always, I mean, I'll just jump in. Like it's always part of. So a client will approach me and say, "I've got this book, this memoir I want to write. I don't know how to do it," and that's what I do. So I help them sit down um, and tell the story. And usually for me, and I think this is actually beneficial for writing anything, is you start from the very basic idea of what does the book look like? Is it I've actually written kind of like novella style memoirs for people, novel length, that traditional book length memoirs as well. And I think it's good you have to sit down and know what the body of your book's going to look like. Do you want it to, is it going to be a big book? Is it going to be shorter? Is it going to be, so I think that sitting down with my clients the first time and just saying, okay, we're writing something book length, 60,000 words, right? Okay. And then explaining to them what the structure of a book is. Cause a lot of people, they know it when they read it, but they don't know it in a practice,
Mhm.
they don't know it as a practice. So I find like you have to sit there and articulate like just what a book structure looks like how it's going to be
How
60,000
long
words.
how long does that initial conversation take with your clients? Is it like a 2-hour Zoom call or
It
are you
depends on.
taking notes? They're just telling you their life and you're taking notes? Like, this is what I'm envisioning. I don't
Oh,
know.
and you're talking about like the interview process, like
Well,
how that like what are we what like what's going to go in the book kind of conversation.
I guess so. Isn't that what you're talking about? Or are you talking about before that?
Well, I think I usually sit down with them and like just get in their head like the
Hmm.
magnitude of what a book is, and the idea that we're not writing, it's not an autobiography. We don't have to start it like I was born on a rainy day in June or something. And you don't, there's not that like that full life arc. You are choosing like, you're kind of picking the piece of pizza you
Hmm.
want out of the
Hmm.
whole thing. And just so they understand like what we're doing. Cause I think that a lot of people will sit down because then for me, the interview process is key. Like I sit down, I like we're doing now, basically press record and interview them for however long it takes to get the story out. But I like to let them know, like if we're writing about a particular part of your life, um, let's say it's like an immigrant story, like if we're writing about like your journey from here to there, or there to here, usually that's the way that would go.
Hmm.
But we don't have to go into like everything. We can like we need things that are adjacent to the main subject, but we don't need to like if it doesn't, if the first 10 years of your life don't matter, we can just gloss those over for context. So I think it's important to like to just know that like we're going to focus for a while on a certain topic,
Hmm.
because it can get really, people can get in the weeds, and then I think when people get in the weeds in that interview process, they kind of get hooked on the weeds, because when memoirs can be tough. I find that a lot of people, like I'm working on one now that I noticed that for about 4 interviews, we talked around the topic because the topic was so painful. And it was just
Hmm.
easy for that person to live in the weeds for a while and talk
Hmm.
about all the other stuff. And really, out of those 4 interviews, I got maybe a chapter's worth of material that is good context, but we could have gotten there a lot faster if we weren't diverting. So I think it's just first off, getting them the idea that we're going to write a book length thing. We're going to focus, like it's going to be around this central topic, and then starting the interview so they know like where we're defaulting to.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think it's clear just in the beginning, you've got to say like we're not writing an autobiography, because that
Yeah. I
comprehension
was
is
gonna
just
bring that up too. Yeah. And I don't think a lot of initial writers know that.
no.
They
Most
don't
people
know the
that come to
difference.
me, yeah, I have a blog that I point them to, mine, and then there's also one on, oh god, I'm blanking on her name.
Friedman?
Jane Friedman has a blog, and I use mine and hers, and I just like it just sort of says like remember
Hmm.
that there's a difference between these two things, and you can write them either one. It's just you have to know which one you're writing.
Other for resource purposes, insert here. I wanted to just bring up two more names. Marion Roach Smith also
Okay.
is teaches a lot about memoir. So you can always go to her. She's got a book that I read, and some classes that you can take. And the other one is Rachel Herron and her book,
Mm,
Fast Draft Your Memoir. I use actually in a lot of my fiction writing too,
mm,
novel or yeah, memoir and fiction writing. Um, and one of the things she talks about, Rachel Herron, in her book is finding those main events in your life, like trying to pick the ones. Like if you don't know exactly what your slice of pizza is going to be, to determine what that is, to list like, I don't know, 5 or 6 or 10 or whatever, just pick a number arbitrarily and write down the big huge things that just pop out in your mind about your life that are just really big. You have a lot of emotion about them, or
right,
they're really right there and they are life defining moments and those
right,
sort of things. So write those events down in a list, and then you can craft your structure, your memoir around those events
yeah.
instead of your whole life. Car driving by.
I do something similar. So after we interview, and I have another colleague that I talk to a lot, and she can't believe how much interviewing I do. I enjoy it.
Hmm.
People are fun to talk to, and I should have been a journalist, I think, sometimes, because I just loved the art of the interview. But I think that what I tend to do is when I take those interviews, I start to, that's what I do. Like, so I take those interviews, make, as the writer, then make those my experience. And then I go through and say, okay, like this is a formative moment. But I really think that it's key. Like if somebody, like, for example, I'm free to say this, I know, but I have a client who had an experience where she worked for her father's business, right? And she was instrumental in like going to markets as a young person and like selling things in the markets. And as a little girl, it's this great image of her, hawking things in this loud market in Liverpool. And but there was no central like moment in that part of the narrative. There was no like story, there was no piece of the story we were driving to. It was just, this is something I did for a period of time and it was formative. And I feel like when you have something like that, this formative period, this thing, it deserves a piece of your book, right? If it belongs in that memoir. But I feel like it's always best to anchor those in like a moment, like a sort of a climactic moment in that part of your life. Like, what was that? Was it the time that you made a great sale, you got robbed, something happened that really defines that thing? I think there's a lot of, when I read early draft memoirs, even the ones that I'm writing, I need those moments to have like a sort of a climax that like, so I can, as I'm building towards something, I want climactic events in each of those eras that the author is giving me. And the great ones always seem to have that, like, that staggering set of climaxes that like rise toward the sort of main character climax.
The next thing I do after picking the piece of pie, picking the time, once I know the era, this is true in any book or any story, but especially so in memoir, I think. And that is the theme, the story hypothesis.
Right.
I think that, when we talked to JP, I really loved the way he picked from Max Neef's needs, coming up with that story hypothesis or that statement about your book, about your character who is you, and helping that, because the book's got to be about something. It can't just be, the time that
Right.
Yeah, so it's an immigration story. That's awesome and will be very interesting and is important reading. The story should be told. But what's it really about?
Right.
Is it about forgiveness? Is it about redemption? Is it about finding love? Is it about, what is it about? Like, not just plot, but underneath. Like, what is that message? Because when someone reads a book, they want to close it and have the satisfaction of having, like, yes, be entertained, but also to kind of learn something, and not just like parable kind of stuff, or, you learn how to change strings on a banjo, like, not that kind of learn stuff, but learn something about yourself or about, mankind or humankind, excuse me, or, whatever. So when you close that memoir, you have to have there has to be a reason, a takeaway message, some reason why the author is telling the story, not just because they want to write words on a page, like, because that's the hard part. What's the message? What's the about? And you can get that by going through Max Neef's, figuring out what are the characters' needs. That's you. So what were the things that that were driving you through this period of your life? And come up with that story hypothesis or that thematic statement that will help you write the book and keep that in your mind, that will help drive that, the message through the book, so that you can re-anchor yourself as, if you tend to go off into the weeds, oh yes, it's about this, that's what I need to make sure is the thread that's going through that whole book length project.
Yeah. Every great story, I believe, is about, it's really about multiple things. Like I'm looking, I can see in my like Game of Thrones over my shoulder. It's like, it's a fantasy story, but it's really about power and many other things. But like ultimately it's about a quest for power. And that's like that's the unifying theme that keeps it from being just a series of events and a series of
But what was
scenes.
J.R. Martin talking about power? What was he saying about power?
Well, in a lot of things, like power corrupts and power motivates and power actually, like, I really think it's more about power blinds, because there's a lot of, in that story there's a lot of, like, a lot of things coming for that world, as in, a lot of environmental disaster coming for that world, but everybody's fighting for the throne and they're just ignoring, the bigger threat.
Yeah,
Without those themes, it's just a series of events, or it's a
right.
loosely stitched series of vignettes. And I think that is something, when you said that, it just, like, yeah, in my process, I have to, when it comes to working with another person's book, I really have to get to that, identifying the theme as
Hmm.
quickly as possible. Some people come to me with it built in, like, I want to write a story about my survival, and I can immediately, okay, survival, there's a theme, we're going to have
Hmm.
to hone it down, but we at least have a theme.
Right.
um but identifying whatever the theme is, either the first layer of theme, or the more nuanced layers of theme when they come up, that really motivates that subject, that person, because then I can say, hey, client, I feel like this story is really about this. Um and, and, and just as, like, a little anecdote, the first memoir I wrote was a for a client who was a great guy, just, but he had that kind of swashbuckling, like, wanted to, like, I want to tell this story because I had an adventure. And as he kept
Hmm.
telling the story, it was really about reunifying with his mother. Like, that's what the story was about.
Mm.
And and even though, like, and I have the interview recorded, and, like, I can find the moment exactly when I said, hey, I really feel like this is a great adventure story, but it's really about you finding your mom again after many years being separated. And he broke down and cried, like, just right in
Aw.
that moment. And he
Hmm.
said, like, I can't talk anymore, this is like, and he hadn't thought of it that way. I mean, I'm sure the emotions lived with him and it changed the course of our interview. But it took me saying, like, hey, I think this is about something else, and we should explore that thing. So I think that's probably happens to people writing their own books too, right? You start out with the inclination, and you get that, oh my gosh, I'm actually writing about this, and that those epiphanies that come
But
along the way.
sometimes it takes talking to someone else to do that, just like your client, like he didn't know until you said it. Then it was like, oh, okay.
Is that
So,
so for you, like, when you're writing your own, how do you
well,
get there?
each book is different, The first book, I totally knew it. That was why I was writing the book, was, connection and yeah. And then this one I didn't have a theme for a long time. And I kept writing it, and it was that weird banal feeling, like, why would anyone care about this? Why am I writing this? This doesn't
Right.
even what yeah. Until I figured out, what that was. And then it was like, oh, okay, now I can put that energy into the book.
Right. Right.
So it's different for every book.
So do you do things like, I mean, I've heard you talk about journaling. Is that a process of getting there for you? Like, do
Of
you like
course,
right.
journaling is always about self-discovery and centering and grounding, and yeah, and knowing you, and the book, I think, really has taken on more of an identity quest feeling,
Sure.
which
Sure.
seems a little, my fear is that it is uh n- when I write a memoir, my fear is that it's too navel gazy all throughout writing.
Love
I'm
that
like,
term. I love that term. God, I love it so much. Navel gazing. Anyway, sorry.
or
That's your
or
fear, that
self
you're
grandiose, or
right.
whatever, like, why would anyone care about this, so I have to really imbue it with that theme, and keep that story hypothesis in mind as I'm reading it, and or writing it, and as I'm revising it, especially as I'm revising it.
Yeah, I think
So,
that's navel gazing is probably. I always hear that term, like, in reference to music. So I guess, yeah, in a memoir that would be like a really difficult.
and I think that
Uh,
when your memoir tends to get navel gazy, it's those loosely linked vignettes.
yeah,
Like, okay, there's this. Well, why are you telling me this? What does this have to do with anything? You're just talking about yourself.
And that's, I mean, not to be like, again, I don't want to like be stereotype anything, but like I was in the library and I saw like a memoir for like one of these like young pop people. I don't even know who they were.
Hmm.
And that's immediately what I thought, like, what is the story here? You're like, what is the memoir here that I'm gonna would get from this book? Like, why would anybody want to read this? Um, so I guess like, and I think that's maybe like diminishing on my part, like to see that, but like I feel like that indulgent feeling, like of when something feels indulgent, like in your story, like what do? Like when you had that feeling of like maybe this is going to be navel gazy, we're going to keep that's going to be the name of the podcast, navel gazy, right? Like, but when you got that sensation, like, well, how did you identify it? Like, and what was the feeling like? And then did you just was that just like triggered the rewrite? And like, I guess how do you direct yourself out of your own feeling of that? Because that like requires insight. Like I think not everybody could have that about their own writing. You know, some people might assume that this is profound stuff, even though they're just telling, a nothing story. So
That's
like,
where the editor comes in. And I think that I think you just have to write the story, navel gazing and all, just write it all down and get it out. I mean, that's what the rough draft is for. Just get
okay,
the story out. And then when you go back through and reread it, if you identify places there, and for me personally, it's like feeling embarrassed, like if you don't want anyone to read this, like, do I want people to know this about me? I mean, that's writing a memoir is difficult in that you're you you have to look bad in order to
yeah,
grow on the page, so you have to show the worst parts of yourself and everyone will read it, and that's a terrifying prospect, and so you have to be ready for that,
yeah.
but not when you're rough drafting. Like, you can just do anything in the rough draft, just get the story all out, and then you can go through and try to look more objectively as much as you can. And if you have that story hypothesis, if you have that theme, when you go through as you're writing it, if you ever feel like, why is anyone going to read this? Making it about the reader, what am I helping the reader to see in themselves, and imbuing that into your scenes will help. And then it's the editor, once it's ready to go to an editor, send it to them, and they can look for the self-indulgence.
And it seems like though in both of our processes, like there has to be this like the subject of the story has to have some, I mean, I don't want to say anything silly, but like about depth, but like you have to have like the objectivity about your own writing or experience to say, okay, I do have to go deeper here, or my gosh, listen to how I sound, um, to find that depth. Because if you can't self be critical of your own work or your own perspective, then you're not going to get that elevated perspective, that next level up that your story is looking for, your
Yeah,
story needs. Your
I'm
story's
going to
not looking
link
for
in the
it.
show notes to, well, JP's episode, because I think that's really important for memoir writing, especially that story hypothesis. But then I'm also going to link to the book title. I can't remember the author off the top of my head, but the book is called Body Work, and it's talking about the radical power of personal narrative. And when
Mm,
I read that book, that helped me go in my memoir to a slightly deeper place, because the phrase that stuck out for me in that whole book was, um, and I'm just going to paraphrase, but basically, if you're writing your story, make sure you're telling the story, not the narrative that you've told yourself. Don't just repeat that on the page, but tell the real story. And that was eye-opening. I was like, oh, okay, all this time I've been writing down the narrative that I've told myself and other people all this time, but I need to go underneath and make it deeper. And
and
that's
I
the scary part,
right.
that's mining for raw emotion and putting that in there.
I just want to rewind on something I said about 5 minutes ago, and it's like this idea that like young people are like there's like not enough depth in a young person to write a narrative, like a compelling narrative or memoir. Like I didn't really mean that, but I think like the surface level of like engaging a memoir on a surface level, which you sometimes see, right? It's usually in celebrity memoirs or something. Like it's it comes with the same polish. The book comes with the same polish that they do, their public persona. There's like no difference. And I feel like, I guess I'm just suspicious of that. And I feel a little, I guess I just feel like a memoir should be like opening up a new layer. That's like my conception of it, that I've actually done like 2 memoirs for public people. And I felt like those were successful because there's this perception of who that person was. And then we got into a different place. And so I feel like about that person, you know, like you could read that, you could know who that person was and then read the book and get something new out of them. I feel like that to me is like a successful book, especially if you're,
Yeah.
I've had multiple clients come back and say like, wow, I read this your draft. And even though these things were wrong, or these, you got these names or whatever, like, you know, there's the details are wrong. Like, this is a side of me I didn't see. And I feel like that's what we want out of a book. Like, it's a side, and that engagement of the self, like, oh, I can identify with this. And then through the process of reading it, see something different in ourselves. That, I mean, that's what we want in story overall. So
Yeah.
so I don't mean to say like young people can't write memoirs. I'm sure there's some really great ones. And if you know a great young person memoir, please put it in the comments, because I want to know what they are.
I can't remember the name of it. I'll have to look one up. Yeah, I'll have to find the title of it and the author's name. But it was about a teenager in high school, and she had an unexplained illness, and so it was
That's a lot of life early on.
yeah. So we can't like
Yeah. Now I'm gonna feel
just
like a complete jerk for
no
saying
no.
that, but it's identifying that, right? And I think that, I guess we associate like age with perspective, and there are some people out there who have some very young people who have some really engaging perspectives on life,
Right,
and
because they've
that,
lived so much in
yeah,
their tiny lives.
yeah, not
And
everybody.
I think
Go ahead.
for the author part of that, making sure that your book description is really spot on and includes that story hypothesis or that theme, because then that will let the reader know that yes, this might look like, a pop singer's biography, but really it's about this,
Right.
that underneath thing. And if you can relate to that, then that's what's going to make you pick up the book.
And I think if you're struggling for that, one of the places I see, I think we're living in a golden age of documentary
Mm-hmm.
film. And there are some artists that I have no interest in like listening to their music, but I will see the presentation of a bio. I mean, again, I'm using the
Yeah.
word bio, but
Uh-huh.
like, you know, sort of a memoirish documentary of their life.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm compelled by it because
Yeah.
of the presentation, and that's in the description of it and the tone of it. And I think that, like, as a memoir writer, if you're struggling to see that in a book, or if you feel like maybe you're in that place where like, am I really like ready to tell, like, I am of the age or the perspective to tell this, go look at the Justin Bieber documentary and how that's presented. I mean, it really is, it's a compelling presentation. And so if somebody like that can, we can have a shift on our perspective of them, I think it opens us up to like what we could do with ourselves. Like, we get past the public persona, get past your like a idea of how things went, and look at things a little deeper. Yeah.
Yeah. There was one I watched years ago on Lady Gaga.
Oh
Same.
yeah.
Like I don't listen to Lady Gaga's music, but the documentary was really interesting and compelling, and to me it was about living your dreams and going after your goals through chronic pain,
Right.
and that's compelling.
Yeah.
Like that is interesting. I don't care
Yeah.
who the person is. I want to know how they did that.
Yeah. There you go. Right there. That's a line. Like, that's a
Hmm.
good line. Like, I don't know who but I will want to know how they did that.
Yeah.
That is, that's an
That's
important
why
part
you
of,
read the book. That's
that's
why
why
you
you read
watch
the
the thing.
book.
Yeah, that's that. So I want to get back to the structure of a
Sure.
memoir. So we've got the
Ooh,
core message then, and then the book is going to either be a narrative read,
right.
like a novel,
Right.
beginning, middle, and end, or it's going to be linked essays. And those essays are linked usually by theme. Um, Yeah. Like Rachel Herron's memoir, My Life in Stitches, I think is what it's called, about the sweaters that she knit. So
Hmm.
they're all essays written about, what was happening during each sweat. She has a shelf in her room of all the sweaters, and every time she picks up a sweater, she knows, like, she has memories of her
The
life
story of when she did that
when
sweater.
she was knitting that sweater. Yeah. So
That's
so
cool.
that yeah, so that was a really neat structure. And so finding a unique structure like that could be a real compelling read too. A reason for a reader to pick up the book if you've created a container for the memoir that is interesting and unique. Um, yeah, so deciding how you want to write that memoir is really important also before you start writing.
I think too, like when you talk about that sort of delivery mechanism, don't call it a gimmick because that's not a gimmick. I
No.
think the way into the story is as yeah, I think there's like this there's the story and then how it's told. And I think you should think about both of those. I read an interesting, like I'm a sports nut, and I read it was kind of more of a collection of blogs, but it was an old man's. He bought a Cubs hat every year from like 1958 or something, and he hangs them all in his garage, and he puts the year on it, and he recollects the seasons and what happened in each of those seasons by just the hat. He can look at it, like the stain. Oh, right, the stain on that hat came from when somebody dumped. Yeah, like so. Whatever that is, I'm not interested in Cubs history as much as I am how that person acts, that storytelling device works. And so I think if you have those, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I think too few people think about how the story is told, especially when it's theirs. I struggle with getting people to, when I come up with something nifty, they usually say, well, I don't want people not to take me seriously. I don't think that's a barrier for a lot of readers. I think that's an enticement.
Yeah, there was another book I read, and I think it was called Love is a Mixtape. Mixtape is in the title.
Oh, mixtape.
Yeah,
That's my jam.
and that was every chapter. It was a grief memoir, but
Right.
every chapter had an actual mixtape of his that, in all of the
Oh man, I
songs
gotta
that
read
were on
this.
it. It was a neat structure to the memoir.
Right.
The other thing I want to say in closing, is those, if you've decided you want to write a narrative arc memoir, and you you have those monumental moments that you've picked out that you want to write about, those global C's, the conflict, choice, and consequence, trying to figure out how to put those events in an order that creates that narrative arc.
Right.
And one thing that I did find in this particular memoir that I'm writing right now is that the most monumental, like the most life-changing moment was actually, should have been, structurally should have been the global choice. So like 3/4 of the way through the book, but it actually happened more like at the midpoint.
Mm.
So, but I couldn't move that. When you're writing memoir, you can move events around, and you can move time around, and you can compress time, and
Yeah.
because it all happened, but you're just moving it around so that it makes sense in the story for someone else to read. But even doing that, I wasn't able to give the global choice as much oomph as that midpoint decision. So in order to do that, I had to not downplay.
Right. You have to prioritize or like emphasize something, right?
I just had to build up the event with words,
Right.
more, so that the structure of the book made sense. So I don't
I'm
know
working.
how you do that when you're working with clients, but
Well,
sometimes that has to happen.
right. That's very difficult. I'm working on one right now for a client, and there's two of the climactic like halfway point events are happen kind of at the same time. Her mother is
Mhm.
passing while she's meeting the person. Like she's they're happening exactly at the same time.
Mhm.
And the struggle, and this is really hard. Actually, I don't really have a way to do this yet, but like how to pull those apart so that we can get the grief of the mother passing, and the what turns out to be false hope of meeting this person, like, because this person ends up being really the worst thing that ever happened to them. But like putting those things together, like, and how to give them each their due is a play on time. It's a play on, extracting things.
It's slowing
So
down the narrative, slowing
big
down the
time.
pairs, the pacing, and really going into that and spending 3-4 chapters on this feeling or
Yeah.
this event where, maybe you could have done it in a shorter period of time, but because you have to create time, you have to
Yeah,
put
it's
some,
it's
and it's
it's
not
taking like
filler.
yeah, it's taking like 7 months of her life, and really it really needs to be 3 chapters, right? It need like the way I'm looking at it now,
Hmm.
I'm gonna have to pull apart the one chapter into three, which is fine. It's all the materials there. It's just how it's gonna be structured. But then there is well, if mother dying meeting this person, it, ultimately, like, how do I structure that? Do I lead with meeting the person, mother dying, marrying the person, or do I go with, how
Hmm.
do I sandwich it? That
Hmm.
becomes like, those become just choices, right? Those become storytelling choices and how you're going to,
Yeah,
I
that's a
think of it as,
craft. It's a
yeah,
creativity.
yeah.
It's an
And the choices,
artistic
and
thing.
those choices I think are right, like you alluded to earlier, like this is why you have beta readers, editors, writers groups, people you work with. These are the things you look at. I mean, if you look at all the narrative and say, this is all right, this is all true, this is all belongs, and then you can get critical with it, that those are where you'll make those choices. So I think you just have to draft it. I'm going to make a mistake and I'm going to hand it to her, and she's either going to love it or not, and we'll move from there. So I think you have to
So
just
I
fall on that
have I
sometimes.
have a quick question. Our time is out, but I just have a quick ghostwriting
Oh
question.
boy.
So
No,
nothing alarming,
I
but
know.
when you finish writing a book
Hmm.
for someone, do you hand it to them and then your job is over, or do they find an editor for that? Do you find an editor for them? Do you also, because you can't edit your own work, so
No,
what
I would
happens?
never. People ask all the time if they can bring me to edit it, and I say I've already put my critical eye on it, and
Hmm.
this is what we get. I can. So usually my process is, my contracts are always, I'm going to give you a rough draft, and then I'm going to run away for a while, and you're going to just live with it. And I ask the client to take at least a month to like read it once, get, usually the first reaction people get is like, oh my God, the details are wrong. Then they have like the second reaction, which is, okay, like, here's how we can work around the details. They really then get into the story. And I prep them for that. I said, you're probably going to be not happy with the details because something's going to be omitted, but really think about the story. Then they hand me back the narrative with notes. And the great notes are usually like many,
Hmm.
and structural and detail oriented. Then I go back and I rewrite it. And then I usually just contract for like one of my rewrites. At that point, most people are open to what comes next. I do recommend that they get an editor in there, and I tell them, like, look, you're happy with this, I'm happy with this. You might find we need a third party to say.
Hmm.
I will find somebody for them. They'll find somebody. The person I'm working with now actually has somebody she wants to work with when this is all over. And then I just sort of, I try to hang around as long as I can and just help them, guide them. And
Uh-huh.
but I tell everybody that it's a process of winnowing down. Like, it's never done until it's published, and so you're going to be making changes for a while.
Hmm.
Um, some people love that idea, some people don't. Um, People who are writing memoirs for families usually just sort of take it and say, "All right, I'm going to print it and send it to people." But yeah, I do not edit my own work,
Okay.
ever. Oh,
Well, thank you for talking with me today. I thought this was a fascinating conversation
this is
because this is
fun.
one of my favorite topics.
And I think we could revisit it in multiple ways, because I think
Hmm.
that there are multiple times that I thought, like, we're just scratching the surface here, or we're just
Hmm.
tickling the idea. So I'd love to come back to it.
All right. Well, next episode is going to be another one of my favorite topics, and that is
Me
planning.
again? Oh,
Planning.
I thought we were gonna do me again. Like, I, I'm just kidding.
So,
Ooh, planning.
yeah, like twice a year at least, I go through and I recheck in and see what it is that, I've got on the docket. Like, is this really what I want to be working towards? What are the things that I'm passionate about right now? Has something changed in the last 6 months? What do I want to focus on now? And and yeah, so I just did that. And you were saying that you had August sort of slated for your business to kind of work on that. So I think next week we might talk about, sort of our process of figuring that out for ourselves. And,
Okay.
and maybe if it's appropriate, we could like maybe pick one thing that we want to work on in the next like 30 days and like the steps of that, and just I think breaking it down for our readers would be helpful so that they could emulate that process too. So, be well.
This will be fun. This will be fun. I am a planner too. I just have like I kind of have a sense of humor about how much of a planner I am, so I have to chuckle a little bit, like, because it's a weird part of me. But
It's a
yeah,
superpower for me.
it
That's how
is for
I look at
you.
it.
Like, every time we talk about this, I'm in awe of how just compartmental you are. Like, and at least you present. We'll find out more next week. But um, yeah, we're going to be very different on this one. I think it'll
Well,
be
that's
really
the beauty of these
that
conversations
that
about
is the
craft
beauty
and
of it.
creativity, is seeing how both of us work. So,
Yeah,
in the meantime, happy writing, happy
absolutely.
planning, and we'll see you next time.
See you next week.